Everyone who knows boxing has heard of Larry Holmes, and if you're old enough, you're sure to remember his famous victories against the likes of Ali Norton and Shivers, along with his losses to Tyson and Spinks. But what about his later fights? All the controversy in the life he's living today. Not so familiar. Then let's take a look at what's now become of this once formidable boxer. Ask most boxing fans who was the greatest of all time, and most of them will say Muhammad Ali, without a moment's hesitation. But if you then ask them to name their top 10 heavyweights, they might add to the list Rocky Marciano, Joe Louis, George Foreman, Mike Tyson, Lennox, Lewis, Joe Frazier, Evander Holyfield, and the like. And alongside these illustrious names, comfortably sits Larry Holmes, the owner of what was arguably heavyweight boxing's most fearsome left jab. His record and achievements in the ring mean he fully deserves his place in the pantheon of heavyweight greats, but his career inside and out of the ring was often tinged with controversy and sometimes regret. His fight with Jerry Cooney was laced with racial overtones, and it featured one of the most distasteful build-ups of any fight for a long, long time. Rightly or wrongly, after his bout against former sparring partner Muhammad Ali, he became a figure of hate among a large section of boxing fans, at least for a time. He almost attained boxing immortality before falling at the last hurdle in his attempt to match Rocky Marciano's record of 49 wins and no defeats. His career in life hit the highs, but it also touched the lows with his infamous altercation with Trevor Berbick, outside the Diplomat Hotel being a perfect example. Some might say that, although in his prime he was among the top heavyweight ever, to lace them up in later years, he tarnished his legacy by being involved in fights he didn't need to take. So, was he truly a legend of the sport, or did he fall short of achieving his full potential? Holmes didn't take up boxing until he was 18, and from his mediocre amateur record, you wouldn't have guessed he was destined to achieve greatness. But after turning pro, he found work as a sparring partner for Muhammad Ali Joe Frazier, the hard-hitting Ernie Shavers, and Jimmy Young, and it was then that he realized he may have something about him, because he thought if he could share a ring with these boxers and give a good account of himself, despite his lack of amateur or a pro experience, then perhaps he had some kind of talent for the sport after all. This apprenticeship served as a sparring partner, stood him in good stead, and he just kept on winning. In his 27th fight, he met Shavers himself and upset him in an easy victory. This landed him a shot at Ken Norton's WBC title, which he duly claimed by way of split decision after a hard-fought contest. He then defended his title several times, including in a rematch against Shavers, which he also won, but then came one of his most controversial matchups against another of his former sparring partners, Muhammad Ali. The fight was originally supposed to take place in Rio de Janeiro's iconic Maracana Stadium, but that was called off, and the bout was finally signed in for Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas. But that's when the real controversy started, because Ali was by this time not only way past his prime, but also in significant decline. Ali was taking the fight in an attempt to become the first four-time heavyweight champ, but concerns were also being raised about his fitness to compete. As a result, he was sent for a neurological checkup, a checkup that, with hindsight, he should never have passed. During the exam, Ali was unable to touch his finger to his nose correctly, and he had trouble coordinating the muscles used for speech. He even lacked the agility to hop on one foot, as well as any regular man of his age should have been able to do. let alone a world-class athlete about to step into a professional boxing ring. So in short, the symptoms of Parkinson's disease were already clear to see. Yet, astonishingly, he was still cleared to box, and the outcome was a foregone conclusion. Holmes stopped Ali for the first and only time in his entire career, and Sylvester Stallone, who watched the fight live famously, remarked that it had been like watching an autopsy on someone who was still alive. But what many boxing fans saw was their defenseless hero, the man who had once been the greatest to ever do it, being beaten up by a merciless aggressor, and this caused a vicious backlash against Holmes. If you remember watching it back then, it probably still makes you wince to think of it, and it's not likely to be a video you'll enjoy looking up and watching back if you've never seen it before. However, Holmes was just doing his job. The fight should never have been made, and it wasn't his fault it had been. He had done countless rounds of sparring with Ali and had huge respect for him. In the interview after the fight, he was seen with tears in his eyes, and when asked why, he said it was because of the respect he had for his opponent. He then added that he fought one of the baddest heavyweights in the world today, and you cannot take credit from him. This showed he knew how little this victory over a shadow of the boxer Ali had once been really meant. For his part, he blamed Ali's earlier fight with Shavers for most of the damage that led to Ali's Parkinson's, although the blows that Holmes credited to Ali's account certainly wouldn't have helped. In his next fight, Holmes defeated Trevor Berbick, Ali's final opponent, before he quit for good, and Holmes's fight against Berbick would ignite a feud between the two men that would finally come to a head 10 years later. Remember that, because we'll come back to it in a moment. 3 fights after, that came another of the most controversial moments in Larry Holmes's boxing career, and that was his bout against Jerry Cooney. In a fight promoted by Don King, Jerry Cooney was cast as the Great White Hope, the man who would beat Holmes to become the first white heavyweight champion in 22 years. In the build-up, Cooney appeared on the cover of Time and Sports illustrated magazines for their coverage of the fight rather than the champion Holmes. Members of Cooney's team stoked the flames of racial tension by wearing clothing displaying the words, "Not the white man, but the right man." And Holmes himself stirred the pot by claiming that if Cooney hadn't been white, he wouldn't have been paid as much. Holmes has always been outspoken, and it's unsurprising that he voiced his opinion in this way. He may have had a point, though, since the champion and challenger received a 50-50 split of the purse, which, let's say, is not exactly the normal way of things. At the fight, it was rumored that white supremacists would try to murder Holmes, so black activists also turned up to protect their man in case of trouble. As a result, police snipers had to be deployed around the arena at Caesar's Palace as a precaution. At the start of the fight, the ring announcer then broke with tradition by introducing Holmes, the champion, first, and Cooney, the challenger, second, something that caused outrage in parts of the boxing community. In the fight itself, Holmes came out on top, taking victory by TKO in the 13th, maintaining his still unbeaten record. Holmes and Cooney went on to become good friends, in later years suggesting that the racial tensions had been manufactured by the promoters to sell the fight. That plan obviously worked, since it proved to be one of the most highly anticipated bouts of the early 80s, an era when many great fights were taking place. However, blaming Holmes or Cooney for any of this is highly unfair. With this victory, Holmes edged ever closer to Rocky Marciano's coveted record of 49-0. Holmes continued to win eventually, reaching 48-0. He now needed just one more victory to write his name in the history books, by tying with Marciano and with one more win. After that, he could take the record outright. But next up was Michael Spinks. Spinks was moving up from light heavyweight. Remember, cruiserweight wasn't really a thing back then. And although Spinks was faster, Holmes was considered a heavy favorite. Spinks, though, had other ideas because he had eyes on making some history of his own. Spinks took the win on points, becoming only the second man to be crowned champion in both the light heavy and heavyweight divisions, and the first man to hold the two titles at the same time. On missing out on boxing immortality, Holmes was disgusted, and in his typical brash style he declared that Rocky Marciano couldn't carry my jockstrap. So much for being magnanimous in defeat, huh? But this was Holmes's style. And although it might not have won him any new fans, you can probably forgive him for being a sore loser, considering what he had just missed out on. The two then contested a rematch, which Holmes also lost. He followed this up in a post-fight interview by uttering the unforgettable words, "The judges, the referees and promoters can kiss me where the sun don't shine, and because we're on HBO, that's my big black behind." And then, having suffered these two unbearable defeats that leave almost anyone sour, he retired. Holmes wasn't done just yet, though he was lured out of retirement 2 years later to fight a prime, Mike Tyson, a fight he also lost. After this, he quickly retired again, and Holmes's time at the top was over. But over the next few years, he made several comebacks, winning the majority of his bouts but losing more often than not when he came up against the top-level fighters. He was never able to regain a heavyweight title, losing all 3 times. He was given a shot. His detractors often accuse him of chasing money by fighting on and risking his health against younger, fitter men, when, by rights, he should have hung up his gloves long before. His final fight was a points victory against Eric Ashe, better known as Butterbean, when he was 52 years old. So you could say they have a point. But on the other hand, who are we to say that a boxer can't keep going to make a bit of cash if it's not harming anybody else? It's not as if he was trying to compete at the highest level at that age, and fights like this were more or less just exhibitions. He wasn't the first to do it either, and nor will he be the last. Before we get to the end, we can't talk about Larry Holmes without coming back to his brawl with Trevor Berbick, because it was one of the most shocking moments in boxing and living memory. It happened at a low-key press conference after one of Holmes's comeback victories, and all seemed to be passing off uneventfully, as expected. But while Holmes was offering up the usual post-fight platitudes, Berbick stood at the back of the room, silently scowling. Then, as proceedings were drawing to a close, Berbick began shouting insults at Holmes, and since Holmes was never one to back down himself, the pair quickly became entangled. The two were separated, and Berbick was taken outside where he continued to rant and rave, and then suddenly Holmes was seen leaping over 2 cars and into the air, at Berbick landing on him with a double-footed kick and sending him flying. Most people would say that Berbick was by far the more unhinged of the two during the incident, but he obviously got under Holmes's skin, creating yet another controversial episode in Holmes's story to go with all the others. If you want to find out more about the crazy life and untimely demise of Trevor Berbick, we have another video about him too, so don't forget to check it out. And if you're enjoying this one, make sure you hit that like button before you go. So, where is Holmes now, and how is he doing? He retired for the last time with a record of 69-6. So, is he paying the price for all the wars he was involved in and all the punches he took to the head? Not really. Holmes has been married since 1979 and has 2 children with his wife. He also has 3 other children from previous relationships. He is an active businessman with several interests. He made plenty of money in the ring, invested it wisely, and is doing very well for himself out of the various business ventures he is and has been involved in. He has a little trouble getting about nowadays, and is sometimes seen using a cane or a walker. But he's 75 years old, and he's hardly the only 75-year-old who has mobility issues. He can seem a little slow, forgetful, or confused sometimes during public appearances. But again, he's 75. That's normal. It could be a result of his 75 heavyweight boxing fights, but it could just be old age. During his career, his reign of 20 heavyweight defenses is second only to Joe Louis. He defeated some of the biggest names of his era. He came tantalizingly close to equaling Rocky Marciano's fabled 49-0 record, and he's deservedly been inducted into the International Boxing Hall of Fame as one of the all-time greats. Yeah, it probably still stings when he thinks about his 2 defeats to Spinks. But other than that, was his career a failure? And is the way he lives now sad? Come on, of course not. What are you talking about? If you've enjoyed this video and want to support us in producing more boxing content, like it, please help us grow by smashing that like button. And don't forget to subscribe so you can catch our new videos as soon as they come out. See you on the next one.